This is Paul. Alex and I are going to kind of help each other out through this section, but now we're starting to get even further into the meat of today's topic. And one of the other routes through which a lot of data breaches occur is through social engineering and manipulation. That is basically preying upon somebody to either knowingly or unknowingly giving up information that allows access. Depending on the study or survey, this accounts for about a third of the data breaches. You'll be amazed at some of the stories at how people get tricked into giving up information that allows access or opening some sort of route for access. But what you tend to see here is quite often carelessness, in which, you know, lawyers sometimes call negligence or recklessness. But basically, it's not paying attention to what you are doing when you're in a data environment or accessing a data environment. Sometimes it can be through fear. One mechanism that you are seeing people gain access to companies' data environment from outside is maybe through a phone call to a person that they impersonate a very irate upper-level management person and do something or say something to scare them into digging up, to providing access credentials, such as a call from someone identifying themselves as a CFO, wondering why on earth that money hadn't been wired yet, and give me the information, I'll do it myself. If you have a company in which you have a culture of fear and not questioning, these tactics tend to work. This is also the source of, or the technique used in these emails, these phishing emails. Your account has been shut down. You need to log in to verify your identity to get access again, things like that. It also preys upon people's natural tendency to want to be helpful. Someone calls in with a problem saying they're from another branch of the company. Look, I'm new here. Someone told me you went through this recently. Can you help me? How do I get into this network or this database? And then there's good old-fashioned greed, which tends to be in the guise of free stuff. Maybe a executive level officer of a company getting a free laptop. You're talking about free apps on iPads and tablets and on cell phones and whatnot. And there's no telling what the true rationale of that free app is or how that free app is actually going to make money. Which kind of, we're going to broaden this out a little more into some other vectors for attack. Phishing emails. We've all seen these. Some of them are absolutely laughable, but they're pervasive. And they're pervasive because, unfortunately, they work. At least when they're well written and well constructed and well thought out. Oftentimes you can spot these a mile away because there are tremendous spelling errors and grammatical errors that you can pretty well figure out. This has been constructed by somebody who is not very familiar with the English language and has poor translations. But quite often these are much more convincing, particularly where you have a very well-written, well-thought-out phishing email that appears to be from a company, maybe a bank, maybe a vendor of a company, maybe the person's credit card company, and you see this blue text that appears to be a trustworthy email address from a trustworthy domain name, but if you hover your cursor over it, you'll see the real email address, or if it's a hot link, you'll see the real URL. Now, that URL may be very close to what the actual company is that the email purports to be from. Maybe it says so-and-so bank.biz instead of so-and-so bank.com, or you may have a single letter missing buried in a long URL that a lot of people aren't going to notice. Those often tend to work, and that's why we keep seeing them. You can have a telephone call be a vector for an attack. There is a convention every year that I have not had the the fortune of being able to go to yet, but I think it would be very interesting, called DEF CON. And think of it as a hacker convention. And they tend to do demonstrations of social engineering. And you can quite often find a lot of inside information about a company floating around on the web, maybe on Facebook, on various chat boards, on Twitter, wherever, and learn some of the lingo and the internal language of that company and acronyms they use so that you can talk in a way that sounds like you work for that company. And one of the demonstrations they did was where they just picked a national retail chain and called the store manager at a randomly selected brick and mortar store for that chain and explained that they were from IT, that there was an update they needed to install, and to save cost, rather than sending IT technicians out to all the individual stores, they needed the store manager to go to a particular website and click on a link so that it would automatically download. It was surprising how easy it was to get somebody to do this. The person calling the store manager knew the language. They knew the names of databases. They knew the names of departments and how they referred to things internally, so it sounded convincing. Fortunately, it was a benevolent demonstration, and when the store manager clicked on the link, nothing catastrophic happened, as it could have if this had been a more malicious attack. You still have problems with stolen and lost hardware. This accounts for about another third of data intrusions. It may be that someone steals a laptop out of a car or a home. It may be that somebody absentmindedly walks off and leaves it, and a dishonest person opportunistically seizes on that chance and picks it up. Again, free things can be a vector for attack. Various malware can be hidden in free apps. You can have apps that are going to transmit data behind the scenes that the person who downloads it doesn't realize it's transmitting or accessing and transmitting. You also have problems with login credentials. They're written on somebody's desk.
Paul, this is Alex. I want to jump in just quickly before you're on the lost hardware and
crew or a customer, somebody that has physical access can get the login credentials that way, or maybe where you have informal business environments where they share login credentials. That tends to get shared beyond the bounds of what the employer would like them to be passed around. There's kind of some mixed information on whether mobile devices are as vulnerable as they have been thought of the last few years. Verizon has a group that does an annual data breach intelligence report, and their more recent findings have been that mobile devices have not been the vector for attacks that they thought they were going to be. There's what's been happening, it tends to be, the data seems to be suggesting, is different than what could happen. Now, there's also the possibility that attacks that originate through data obtained from a mobile device could be categorized as stolen or lost hardware. Alex, we're having a little trouble with our phone. If you're wanting to jump in, please do so.
Yeah, I figured you guys weren't hearing everything. I was just going to add, sort of not necessarily a new tactic, but a tactic that goes along sort of the free stuff and the lost hardware is a tactic called baiting, which is basically leaving a thumb drive or a hard drive or a disk somewhere where they know an employee of a particular company is likely to pick it up, and having that device be infected with some sort of a malware that then lets the attacker into the system. Usually there's playing on the curiosity of people. If you find a thumb drive laying around, many people are very curious, have to know what's on it. That's by the same token that, also should be skeptical of thumb drives. A lot of us go to conferences, we get thumb drives with the program materials. Sometimes malware is infected onto the thumb drives before they are distributed and embedded with the program materials. So I really recommend for companies in that scenario to have policies about their employees plugging in foreign devices, whether it be a thumb drive from home or an external drive of some type, just because it's almost impossible to know the content of those drives. That's all.
All right, so talking about some of the basics to protect against attacks that originate through efforts of social engineering and manipulation. Again, we're talking about covering the basics. Lock your doors at night, keep your car windows rolled up type of things. These may be fairly simple and seem fairly obvious, but collectively they will protect companies from a tremendous percentage of the attacks that are out there. Obviously, if you have a committed hacker who has intent or a motive to get into a particular system and is driven to do so and has the technical wherewithal, they're going to get in. But this cuts down on a lot of the opportunistic and drive-by hackings, if you will, whether from inside the company or externally. One of the first things you can use is two-factor authentication, and this goes back to some of the things Don was talking about, where you have to have not only login credentials, but you have to have the particular device, or you have to make sure that it is the person with authorization who is using that device. Obviously, the first step here is not having devices store in their memory the login credentials. You know, the first time you use a website, your phone or the website may pop up and ask whether you want the website to retain those credentials, and the answer to that should always be no. That leads to the problem of someone else accessing that data portal through that device, and it not being the authorized user's fingers on the keyboard. It has come up several times today, but we can't say it enough. Encryption, encryption, encryption of data. And hearkening back to the data retention earlier, I did gloss over this, but with your data destruction, you need to not only have a defensible process for eliminating data, which truly eliminates it, but you also need to make sure that encryption keys are eliminated as well. Companies need to adopt password requirements as to how strong the password is, certain common ones that can't be used. This goes back to what Don said, but it's a very basic first step. There need to be requirements as to the strength, and this needs to be a policy, but not just a policy, but obviously needs to be done in such a way that there's a technological impediment to using too simple of a password. The life cycle of the password needs to be dictated as far as how long passwords are valid and how quickly you can go back to a previously used password and not use the one that you just used 2 months ago. Obviously, passwords need to be compartmentalized. The person that has the same password for every single repository of data is going to have a security problem if that password is compromised. You need to educate your employees. Regular emails, regular updates, reminders, lessons. This is a constant effort that needs to be undertaken. One of the things our firm does is whenever someone here receives a phishing email, it will get kicked to our IT department, and quite a few of those will get circulated by way of a screen grab or being converted to a PDF to all the employees as kind of a, an opportunity to have a teaching moment. So some sort of system of regularly bringing these issues up to the minds of your employees, especially as they evolve and change and new techniques are tried. Get those out to your employees. Get those out to your clients. You need to have somebody help recognize security issues. Cover the basics with your employees. Talk to employees about, especially lawyers. I'm talking to us when I say this. When you're sitting in the airport, when you're sitting in the coffee house, when you're sitting somewhere and you go to grab a wireless network, make sure it's the correct one. Basics, things like that, because the wireless network you grab may say coffee house when you scan for networks, but it's actually the gentleman sitting 3 seats down who has set up a little hotspot, and you've jumped on his wireless, and now he's intercepting the data you're exchanging. You need to have the ability to remotely wipe portable devices if they get lost, to destroy the data that's on those in case it is stolen and compromised. Implement technological safeguards and controls for data and access to data. There needs to be someone in the organization specifically designated to stay current on things like this. What products are out there? What techniques are out there? What are the latest techniques in intrusion? You need to have some way of limiting downloads of data. If all of a sudden a 3 million record database starts getting uploaded to an FTP, that's something that you need to have some mechanism of noticing. Restrict web traffic as far as particular websites, ones that are known to be hazardous or contain hazards, or to create security problems, and monitor the access to data and data movement within the environment. This goes back to employees should only have access to what their job requires them to access. And if someone's login credentials are compromised and they're all of a sudden using those login credentials to peruse data that employee should not be using in the usual course of their business, there needs to be a mechanism for noticing that as well. And as Don talked about with separating employees, you need to have a checklist that sets out specific things that are done to make sure that that person is deauthorized and that any passphrases and login credentials they had no longer operate, and that they no longer have physical access to any of the data that needs to be protected.